I'm Eric Newton, and this is The Together Show. We all know relationships take work, but what is that work, and how do we do it? As a former divorce lawyer, I've watched thousands of couples break up firsthand. Having seen the worst in relationships, I decided to try to help couples stay together. So on this show, we talk to real couples and find out what love really looks like.
We can be connected as a couple, but through the tool of non-monogamy, I grant you freedom to get to know that highest version of yourself, because I'm devoted to that man, and I'm devoted to the relationship that fosters that man.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for listening. We're posting an episode today that serves as something of a contrast to our show on Tuesday. Today's couple couldn't be more different than Tuesdays in many respects, but they're equally successful as a couple. And by that I mean they're in love, they're committed, they're making their relationship work, and they're living exactly the marriage that they want to live. And the marriage that they want to live is fairly uncommon in our culture, though it's becoming more common, and it's certainly common on this show. Rather than give it away, I'll let them tell the story. So with that, let's go to our interview with Candice and Adam.
I think maybe like 2 weeks or so into the relationship, we both co-discovered together. And what we immediately began to do was, I'm not going to put my trust in you or in me, but I'm going to put my trust in this thing that's being created between us. And however that shows up, I might have, an expectation or a fear. We're humans. There's going to be a lot of baggage that's going to come within that. But I know that connection that's being created is big enough to hold whatever that is, and I trust the outcome of that. So if today you decide, you know what, this isn't for me anymore, like we can trust the relationship to hold that and carry us to the next point of our lives that we're meant to go. So there's that piece. But as far as like, how did you know it was real? Maybe the dopamine, maybe to go a little more specific to you. I can just say from my experience that I had been married previously, and I'd been with this man for 7 years. So I knew what relationship looked and felt like. From age 22 to 28, 29, I knew what relationship looked and felt like. And then I had a few years in between where I got to experience that kind of like, let me just see, date as many people as possible and experience that, and wow, fall in love, and go to Burning Man, and have a magical night with someone. But, the next day or within a few days, I would always start to ground into a reality that would indicate to me, this is played out. I've learned the lesson here that I've meant to learn. And all I can say now is this hasn't played out yet. Like, we're still on the dopamine high, or we're still connected. So
Are you married?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And what were your wedding vows? What were the actual promises that you made? You don't have to tell me verbatim, but just
we actually have them framed on our.
We have them framed
Yeah.
on our altar at home. And
they're on YouTube.
And I can at least pull up the writing. We don't have to read them, but
I'll put a link to the YouTube in the show notes if you like.
I would say we can give you that later. I would say the main one that got that I think was I'm the most proud of was vowing to give her I think it was to always aspire to give you what you want, when you want it, the way you want it.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And there was a level, and continues to be a level, I think, of devotion to the other that I've been just wowed by. I was actually, it was very edgy for me to promise to do that to anyone. And then Candice came back and in her vows, which I had not read at the altar, talked about how she had decided to be devoted to me.
Yeah, I kind of recounted as kind of a moment that we shared early on in the relationship, within a few weeks of meeting, about how I wanted to know what it was like to be completely devoted to a man. And I know that there's probably a lot of, there can be a lot of like stuff that comes up with the notion of that. Like, oh, are you giving away your power or whatever? Or like, does
that
he
is not my experience of your devotion.
No.
Yeah.
Or do you make, does he make all the decisions for you? And it's like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just a moment of surrender. I want to know what it's like to surrender and to be surrendered to this thing between us. And I guess the best words we can put to that is devotion to a man.
And I think we both, in our way,
or devotion to the relationship.
Yeah. Well, and at some point, early on, the way that I felt comfortable, actually, and I'm just going to share early on, Candice told me that she wasn't committed to a traditionally monogamous relationship. She actually was adamantly opposed to ever doing that again. She'd been married and just didn't think it worked.
For me.
For
That's
her.
not to say that doesn't work for other people, just to clarify.
And, I read that as her rejecting me, essentially. I read that as like, oh, I like you, but you're not the one, so I'm going to keep dating other people. Which, oddly enough, kind of gave all my screwed up attachment issues enough to go on of like, okay, this is going to be a turbulent enough relationship that you can completely fall in love with this person. And then she turned around and just met me with this enormous amount of devotion. And the math I did in my head early on, and some of my friends who'd seen me go through relationships with women who maybe didn't treat me terribly well, or however you want to frame it. I don't want to speak to those women. I actually still really like a lot of them and have great relationships with them now. But they'd seen me kind of go through hell with other relationships. And they were like, don't do this to yourself again. And all I could think was, well, I'm already in emotionally. My heart just said this one. And for me, it was like, well, I could end it now and go through heartbreak, or see where it goes. And if it goes badly, then I go through heartbreak. So I just chose to surrender fully to the relationship and trust it. And also to trust my own heart and kind of trust an inner wisdom that chooses partners even when it's not great for you at first.
So let me back up and break that out a little bit more. There was, on one hand, you hadn't experienced non-monogamy before, or did I just make that bit up?
No, I had.
Okay, so I'm wrong with that. But
I didn't trust it
in
terms of a real stable relationship. I didn't think you could have a healthy non-monogamous relationship, or I didn't think that I could.
So then you had this very strong connection with this woman. Things were going at a rate that you'd never experienced before towards intimacy and depth. And then you got the message that she wanted non-monogamy in her life, and that felt like rejection to you. That could have been the end of it, but then she met you with this extraordinary devotion concept. How do those two things come together in one place? How do you have non-monogamy and devotion in your experience?
I can say, for me, from my experience, I don't see them as being at odds with each other. I in fact see them being very complementary, because I am devoted to you, to your growth, to your being, to whatever lessons you are meant to learn. And we can be connected as a couple, but through the tool of non-monogamy, I grant you freedom to get to know that highest version of yourself, because I'm devoted to that man, and I'm devoted to the relationship that fosters that man, and the relationship that fosters that within myself.
Now, so it's clear to me that your own personal work has to do with that process, the process of non-monogamy. Is it a requirement for you that he also does that process? What if for him, his highest self was actually conscious monogamy?
Well, then that would be something, if that were to shift, that would be something we could discuss. I think this is part of the value of doing a lot of work and knowing yourself before committing to a relationship, first of all. Second of all, we do have an agreement that if at any point during our relationship the either person just feels unsafe or whatever, they can pull I guess a red card, which you'd call in soccer, and we close the relationship until whatever it is that needs to be worked out is worked out, until we both feel comfortable enough to open it up again.
Yeah, and if I can speak to that, our agreement from early on was, and I feel like this is still the core agreement, is the degree to which we are solid as a couple is the degree to which we're open. Because where I see this go haywire is when couples start to fray at the edges and then retreat into other relationships.
Exactly.
And we don't have, at the moment, ongoing, incredibly deep relationships. I mean, some people have like full-on other partnerships, and that's not what we're doing. But just to answer your earlier question about how does devotion and openness go together, at least the way that we're doing it, that's the only way it could work, is if, I am 100% committed to the marriage and the partnership and the love and giving Candice what she wants, when she wants it, how she wants it, and supporting her and, being the best husband that I can be and her being the best wife that she can be, then that core is there and solid. And our expression sexually or romantically with others has nothing to do with that. It's just an extension of who we are.
It comes back and feeds the relationship is how
Yeah.
I see it. I don't see him as like escaping me or needing something else that he can't get from me. It's just, you have a different connection there, and whatever you learn there is only ultimately going to come back and feed us as,
And what
in
it
a relationship.
removes for me is the safety net of you'll just be here.
Right.
It's like, no, you have to want to be here. I have to create something for you to be here.
Right.
I can't just get lazy and assume that she's going to continue to, to just get her, not have her needs met or not be happy. Like there's, it's kind of there is an element of danger, I suppose, although I don't think of it that way. There's just an element of reality, because marriages will fall apart. Committed marriages, people cheat. And by the way, committed marriages can be wonderfully successful too. I really, I want to emphasize that I'm not against monogamous marriages. But I think for our personal evolution, this feels like absolutely the right thing, that we couldn't just park it in neutral and say, okay, we're committed. Now I'm just going to do whatever I want to do and not pay attention to the marriage. Our attention doesn't even have to. It just naturally does within this framework come back to nourishing each other.
It becomes an active, participatory, day-to-day relationship. Like you said, you can't just park it. Well, we're committed. The rings are on. We're done. And for us, because there's this added element of constant interactive flux, I don't know how else to say it, beyond the bounds of our own relationship, there's just always learning and growth that automatically comes back and feeds us. And we have to consciously be paying attention and nourishing it. And
she's also my partner in my own, sensual, sexual experience of my life. And I couldn't imagine, it really, there's almost nothing that's not on the table between us.
In terms of your sexual self-expression?
Well, yeah, and what we would talk about as a couple. There's room for so much of who and what I am, just because that energy isn't kind of kept in this separate box where, if I'm attracted to someone, I just shouldn't share it with my wife. Or, an experience I imagine most people have every day. That I just couldn't imagine hiding that from her. It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm barraging her with my crushes and this girl's cute. I mean, maybe I am sometimes. But it doesn't feel like a huge portion of our relationship. But what it does feel like is a free flow of energy that would otherwise be blocked. and a level of natural intimacy that just occurs. And I have such a value for me in my life at this point with anyone I'm close with, just being who the fuck I am, and it doesn't make sense to me that in my most intimate relationship, I shouldn't be able to be exactly who I am, and that shouldn't be a good thing. Maybe it's aspirational, but for us, it seems to work, which to me is nothing short of a miracle.
Now, we've had a lot of non-monogamous couples on this show, all different configurations. And through that process, I myself have become a huge proponent of non-monogamy for people for whom it works. I myself am a monogamist by choice and happily. But I think that we have a lot to learn from non-monogamy. I think that polyamory and non-monogamy are on the cutting edge of what's possible in human romantic dynamics right now. I'm very curious about one specific issue that I think the non-monogamous have more experience with than anybody else, and that is jealousy. The true nature of jealousy and what's possible for us to learn about ourselves and our partners through jealousy. I suspect you have a lot to say about that. What do you think on that topic?
Well, that's a really rich topic. There's a lot we could say. First, I'll just say I think jealousy was part of the reason why we ended up getting engaged the night we got engaged.
That's true.
But the biggest piece I'll say is that jealousy is an opportunity for me to recognize where I'm seeing a desire that I'm either not asking for, that is unacknowledged, or that simply isn't being met in a way that we maybe had agreed earlier on. So whenever I'm jealous, it's because I'm seeing him act in a way that it's not to do with the other person, like the other woman or whatever. It has to do with like, oh, there's some level of attention or there's some desire that I'm seeing over there that I want to experience myself. So then it becomes less about like, you can't do that thing with her, you have to do it with me. It becomes, oh, as long as I'm met in this way, then I'm fulfilled, and go out and learn more and experience more. So that's how I work with jealousy.
That's fascinating. Now, I thought when you began that sentence that you were moving towards commentary on fear. That seeing it happen seeing something happen somewhere else means that there's something wrong and you're not able to get it yourself. But you flip that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fear is a thing that is present. So I'm not going to say like, no, I never experience fear. Of course, fear can be a factor. But to me, it's just information. And through a lot of work, I'm still learning this lesson more and more, the fact that something isn't happening to me is not a direct reflection of my own intrinsic value as a human.
Say that again.
The fact that I'm seeing something that's not happening to me that I want is not a reflection of my direct intrinsic value as a human.
Got it, yeah.
That is a lesson I had to learn often.
Yeah.
And a lot.
Can you give an example? I get that conceptually. Can you give
Totally.
an example to make it more grounded?
So maybe we could talk a little bit about, do you feel comfortable with me talking about just like our connection early on?
Sure.
Sexually? Okay. So early on in the relationship, when we had sex, there was definitely a lot of depth, but there seemed to be this flavor, you usually think like in the beginning of a relationship, it's like hot sex, throw you against the wall. Oh my God. Oh, got it. Like that kind of sex. And for us, it was like, let's go down to the depths of our shadows and like, or sometimes we would just be kind of in different worlds, like enjoying ourselves, but like almost like in different worlds and not quite connecting. And for a long while, and he had a particular flavor with another woman that was, like deep, intense, like, and so for a while I carried that as I am not accessing my orgasm to my fullest, and I am not as sexually, expressive or have a sexual prowess that I thought I did. And over time, what I've learned is that
which meant something was wrong
with me, exactly.
or with
something
the
was
relationship.
broken with. It wasn't with the relationship. It was so at times I would try to make it about the relationship, but it was like something was broken in my sex, and it was my fault that he wasn't getting a particular experience that he thought he wanted, or what I perceived was what he was wanting. And over time, first of all, I'll just say the sex has gotten richer, deeper, fuller, more orgasmic, which is kind of the opposite of how most people think of relationships. It's like at the beginning it was hot and heavy. Now we don't do it anymore. It's like now each time we come together, sorry, low-hanging fruit. Each time, we experience each other sexually more and more, there's just something new to learn and experience. So what I started to do also was to, and I think what he was wanting from me was a certain level of, this is who I am, this is how my orgasm shows up, and I want you to meet me here. And it was something along those, perhaps, or he's looking at me like, that's not quite it. But I think
actually, I'm trying to understand. I've never heard you use those phrases before, so I'm just trying to, I don't know that I completely understand what you mean by that.
Got it. I think it's more owning my desire turns you on, and you can rather than me trying to like contort myself to please him.
Oh yeah, that's right. We were in this dynamic of like you thought that I wanted you to please me, and I wanted you to be really in your pleasure.
Right.
And so we kind of that wound up with kind of both of us in like a negative feedback loop almost, where our sex would just kind of.
Got it. Okay, so
you would be reading me for what I want, and I would be looking to you for what you want, and it would kind of cancel out.
Right.
And you learn that what works is when you each acknowledge what you want and get it or ask for it.
Yeah, and there was a lot. I mean, that was definitely the highest level. Like there's a I would say for us, and I would imagine for many people, and certainly a lot of the people that I work with as a coach, desire comes packaged in a lot of shame.
Yeah.
So
this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to turn to next. So finish your sentence, and then I've got a follow-up for you about it.
Well, so as we were going through this, it's not as simple as just one moment, because we actually came to that conclusion quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Or quite a while before it showed up as progress in our sexual connection, and what was around that was like a lot of sadness, a lot of anger, and this leads into, I think, one of the core kind of superpowers of our relationship in particular, which is that I feel like we can have a lot of room for each other's emotions and the impact we have on each other.
The question of shame around our sexual desires is fascinating to me, because essentially, and because I think just about everybody has shame around their sexual desires. There's this sense that we're all uniquely broken, that people have for some reason. It's this collective pathology. And in addition to that, there's this idea that the thing that I want makes me so broken that I'm unlovable. And, and everybody believes deep down most people believe deep down that that's true about the thing that they truly want and have never told anyone.
But I think 80% of people can't even identify what it is that they want,
because they've hidden it from themselves.
And that's where I think most the frustration lives. I think if most people were like, "Oh, I know exactly what I want, and you're just not giving it to me, or we're not a match," then you just you go on. But I think most people are like, their wants and their kind of the expectation that society puts on the programming, kind of the social programming gets put on top of authentic desire, and along with like gender roles and stereotypes and and beliefs about what relationships should look like. So all of that entangled completely masks what you actually want. So then when you're interacting, all you know is something isn't right, something's off, but you can't say it's because I've been programmed to want such a thing, or I can't even speak to what it is that I want. Do you have, an hour to just sit with me while I feel my feelings and maybe some desire will arise.
I mean, this is a core human wound, and I had a great teacher, a coaching teacher actually, who talked about what are called holding environments as children. And essentially, like the perfect holding environment being like what holds your organism in its entirety. So a womb is a almost perfect holding environment, right? Like every need that you could think to have as a fetus is met immediately without even knowing you needed it. And then birth is a massive shock from that holding environment. And then as you grow older, the holding environment, which is the ability to have your needs met, shifts. And I don't know that there's a human being who hasn't had some kind of a letdown.
Yeah, that's our experience.
In their holding environment. And at some point, the terror of realizing your needs won't be met by an outside source is greater than the terror of having something wrong with you such that you are someone whose needs aren't met. And that's where this identity piece comes in of, what we're talking about, that wound around your wants is, I'm just a person who never gets X.
And so you have that wound. So the first step, you're essentially saying, is to uncover by sitting with and allowing the experiences to come up, is to uncover what it is that you actually want. And then step 2 is somehow to articulate it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think, something along
roughly,
those lines.
did you want to add anything to that?
Well, when I think of step 1, it's not it's not exactly uncovering what is we don't want. It's just feeling what is right now.
Yeah.
And then I think that's how we relate also in terms of conflict, which I'm sure you're going to get to in a bit. It's the first thing.
No, we'll get to it now.
Okay, great. No, he said later. Stick to the program. It's just, first of all, just identifying that there's something to be felt and feeling it. And then from there, perhaps the desire, the thing that wants to be said can arise. And then we can move forward from there.
Okay. And then then you come to stage 2, which is you now know what you want and you've got to articulate it, but you're terrified because you think you're going to be rejected by your partner because the thing you want is awful. How should that play out?
Well, I wouldn't prescribe a general should to it, but I would say, how we do it and how I'm an advocate for anyone that I would help with this is it's almost like building up a muscle of tolerating emotional discomfort. And that is actually, it's not even a skill. It's just a level of strength. And maybe a little bit of faith too, because for me, I've had the feedback of, wow, when I can be with something that's uncomfortable without trying to contract around it, and that, just to ground this in reality a little bit, what that can look like is, I'm getting I want something, I feel ashamed about wanting it, I'm not getting it, well, I'm going to make her feel like crap as a really lame strategy to get her to do what I want to do, which never works. And, and a lot of times, like these sort of relationships that turn highly conflicted, at the core of it is that kind of like, I just can't even let you know how vulnerable this is for me right now. So I'm going to get aggressive about it, or I'm going to pretend that's not true at all. And you're going to get aggressive with me about that being true. Is that following?
Totally makes sense. What I'm curious about is, again, as you're saying, like getting practical about it, what are steps?
Right. So what this looks like for me is, right now, like, hey, Candice, I'm not actually feeling this right now, but what it might look like is me saying something like, I'm feeling really scared about something that I want to share with you. I'm like sweating. And I might even, as I'm sharing it, like really factor in how I'm feeling. And there's a reason for that. And it's not just an intellectual exploration. It's that I am sharing my emotional self with her emotional self. So I'm sharing my fear. I'm sharing my shame.
Which builds a trust.
It builds intimacy. Like the intimacy doesn't happen on the intellectual level, for me at least. The intimacy happens on the emotional level. And the reason, it's like, oh, intimacy, it sounds like a good idea. I guess I'm supposed to want it. Why? It's because it's this emotional limbic connection that ultimately creates safety. And like I said earlier, I'm invested in being in a relationship where I get to be who the fuck I am all the time. It's not just about my thoughts about it. And when we're talking about desires and wants, that's on an emotional level. And it's a fluid thing. And it's not a logical thing. So being able to sort of watch this river of experience go by, like, well, now I'm scared. Now I'm sharing it with you. Now I have this desire for something that you don't want, and I'm scared it's going to really upset you when I share it with you, or you won't feel good about yourself. And then, having room for the impact, having room for her to be really hurt by it. And I think that...
Or whatever, or reject you.
Or reject me, or all those things. And it's gotten really intense. I mean, I think the most intense moment was one morning when I'd shared about basically how I wasn't happy with our sexual connection. And it was a night that had fallen apart. Like, we're not... By no means is this always going picture perfect, paint by numbers. And we are able to somehow find our way through it. And there was like one morning where she looked at me, she's like, I am so mad at you. I'm looking at the room at everything you love, and I want to break it.
And she was mad because you had said that there was no sexual connection?
I hadn't said there was no sexual connection, but I had shared that I was hungry for a level of turn on in our sex, or a flavor of turn on that I wasn't getting.
What about that made you angry?
Whew. Well, I think first of all, I think he was reflecting something that I had been feeling, but was also afraid to articulate. So I was angry that he got there first.
And that's interesting too.
That's news.
He got there first. Did that insinuate that it was something wrong with you?
With me, yeah. And also, I think we had been... I mean, this wasn't the first time I'd ever heard something along these lines. We'd been going back and forth around, like, well, you need to be doing this more, or you need to be doing that more, blaming. And granted, this is a few years ago. This is definitely not recent stuff. So I just want to clarify that. But
I think it was Valentine's Day.
It was a Valentine's Day or something.
It's a perfect day for romantic fights.
Our Valentine's Day, I think we're going to avoid
Well,
them.
we always wind up better afterwards.
Yeah. But it hurts. I think ultimately that's it. It's like I can feel angry, I can feel blamed, I can feel that, but ultimately the thing that I'm most scared to say is just, ow, that really hurts. And I think that's something that a lot of people are in their relationships are unable or afraid to articulate. They'd rather say either it's gloss it over, or no, there's something, turn it into blame or cover it with anger, but just to be so vulnerable and look at someone and say, ow, I feel so hurt. Like, this just hurts. And to sit with the hurt rather than deflect it back at, well, you're not meeting me by doing this. That's what I think is what's able to convert the conflict into intimacy, is both of our willingness to sit in the deep discomfort of whatever feeling wants to be felt without deflecting into blame.
Including the reaction that he's going to have to the idea that something he said hurt you.
Absolutely. There's nothing more than he doesn't want to hurt me. There's nothing worse than hurting your partner.
And as much as possible, I think we both try to hold the idea that even if she's saying that I hurt her, this isn't my fault. It's not that I'm bad. It's not that I'm a bad husband. And it's also not that it's not going to break us. It's just a big experience that's happening right now.
Right.
And this idea of we're just being who we are, we trust each other, we trust the relationship, and coming back to that initial commitment to not even trust each other, but trust the expression of what happens between us, even if that leads to us realizing we're not right together.
Well, does it... Well, let me back up and ask about the hurt feeling. Does it hurt because... Again, it's your fault? Where does the hurt come from? If he's making a general statement that our sex life isn't giving me what I need, which from one perspective could be his trying to open a dialogue about how both of you could get what you need. which is an innocuous thing, which is
Sure.
actually a romantic thing
Sure.
from one perspective.
Sure.
From another perspective, it's an attack, and it's an aspersion on your character or your quality as a lover. Is that where you went, that hurt manifested?
So I think to answer and not answer your question, I think to harken back what Adam was talking about, emotional languages and emotional intelligence, they're not rational and they're not logical. So I can't say for sure. I can't psychoanalyze myself I'm sure there's something around feeling valuable and contributing to the relationship, or something tangled up in there around that. But what I can say is there was a hurt present, and it just wanted to be felt. I mean, for all I know, it could be the psychic wounding of masculine, feminine, gender neutral, non-binary, whatever, like just anger between humanity, in the universe. I mean, it could be as broad as that. It could be a moment when I was 4 when like my mom yelled at me or something. Who knows? It's that, and it's everything else. But I think where a lot of people might get tripped up in their relating is trying to figure out the source of the hurt rather than just saying, ow, I feel hurt. This is what it feels like to feel hurt.
And let it process through.
Yes.
Yeah, and probably processing through a feeling that you've never gotten to process through. I mean, there's some distinctions here, and a big one is, there are people who are definitely hooked on drama, and that's not what I'm talking about or what we're talking about. This is more like, wow, this is a place this is such a hurt place in my emotional self, in my being. Like the rejection I feel in this place, or the shame I feel about this, or the embarrassment is so large that I'm having all kinds of feelings, and now I'm angry, and now I'm hurt, and having space for that full expression. But the one thing that I think it's safe to say you didn't do was try to make it not true. You never said like, you're just wrong, or this is your fault, or you're fucked up sexually, actually. This is, you're not doing it, which actually, I mean, is sort of true. It's equally my creation as it is yours. But this thing of like, okay, I don't want this to be this way, and I'm having all kinds of feelings about it, but I'm going to let it sit there.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah, and what it does is suddenly this whole piece of your psyche that is dedicated to making this aspect of reality not happen gets to take it in. And with the thing that is difficult or unpleasant is actually just also a whole spectrum of reality itself that gets to come online. And that's where this style of relating for me, and Candice and I also happened to meet like a year after doing a transformational coaching program for me, and you did the coaching program at One Taste.
Yeah.
So
we've been through
very much about this paradigm,
right? Feeling of listening to your limbic system, feeling it, articulating it, and the biggest thing here is taking responsibility for your own experience within it.
It is fascinating. I mean, it is extraordinarily insightful to say that when the part of us that has been resisting something for so long gets to surrender to that thing. Mm-hmm. It opens up a whole area of our experience that was just completely shut down, and also a whole lot of energy that was being put into this resistance now gets to be placed somewhere else.
Freed up as turn on that you can share with your partner. Because some of the best sexual interactions we've had have been after we've had some of these breakdowns, and then like there's all this energy freed up, and it's like, oh, here's just another level of intimacy we now get to share.
Well, so this touches on another issue that we've been talking around that I wanted to head towards, which is the notion that conflict creates intimacy. And I know that that's something that you work with and probably have a lot to say about. So let me ask one specific question, which is, how does loving your partner for who they are completely, including the stuff that might smell bad, play into that concept?
How does loving your partner the way they are? Well, that's a great question. that's just the standard while I think about this. Let me say that.
Plus, it makes your host smile. So
I'm trying to understand. I'm just trying to.
I'm trying to wrap my round.
I have an example.
Okay, great.
That may.
It goes back to the conversations around sexuality that we were talking about. So hypothetically, your partner has a desire that you can't really tolerate for whatever reason. It's a desire that just goes outside of a personal boundary for you. And the kind of the question, and then that's going to create a conflict. It's a desire that one person has, and the other person can't and is not willing to tolerate that desire. That's conflict. What do you do in that moment with that desire?
So there's two things for me. Like when you say the parts that smell bad, like, you know, I go to more like the little habits that annoy me, you know. Of course, Candice has none of those. But no, I mean, yeah, there's like little things, and those just sort of exist, and they're not a big deal. They're just like the little things that happen in any relationship. But when I think of that, I mean, what you're talking about there is where the most wounded, hurt, vulnerable parts of ourselves are touching.
Sexuality.
Yeah.
Sexuality, or wherever that is, wherever that place where there is an enormous emotional charge is. I mean, it's like a dowsing rod for, you know, here's where
to look.
Here's where the wound is.
Yeah.
But there's been a concept that I've just been playing with for most of our relationship, which is that there is a cutting edge of intimacy at all times. There is like a specific place in both of us where we're either meeting or we're hiding, and at all times. And I mean, and when the sexuality kind of drops in a lot of couples, I feel like that place where there is the most intimate emotional connection or personal connection is blocked. Like there's sort of been an agreement to stop talking about that or not go there because it's too hairy. And I also want to add, like, it's important sometimes to give some space. It's okay for the intimacy to breathe, to move out and in, to have some time. Like, you don't need to go right into every conflict before you're ready when you can't handle it.
Yeah. Sometimes I've had to like leave the room for a few hours or something like that just so I can breathe and I can actually get in touch with what's happening rather than being caught above myself in the frenzy of the overwhelm of feelings.
Yeah. But chances are where there's the most upset, that is almost by definition the most intimate place.
So what do you do with it?
Well, one thing I can do, you know, when I think of things that maybe, you know, Adam or that I want or that may seem sad or unsavory, like the first question I tend to ask myself then is like, okay, first of all, there's like two questions. There's, what is it about this that is upsetting me so much? So how can I have this go deeper into this inquiry? Like what is it about? Why do because if you have a lot of like repulsion or charge around something, that means there's probably an equal amount of desire or wanting or something unsaid on the other side. And it can often look like, no, don't do that thing. But really there might be I wish I knew how to connect to you in this place, and you're not able to say that. All you know is like, don't do that thing. Don't do that
let's
thing.
Let's use an actual example, but one that's innocuous.
Sure.
Anal sex, for example.
Okay.
So you want it, he doesn't.
Uh-huh.
He thinks it's gross. He's not willing to go there.
Right.
You really, really want
Right.
it. So you're saying that in this case, Adam would look inside and ask himself, what is it about anal sex that I so desperately don't want? And then the flip side is, what on the other side of that is it that I proactively want and am not getting that's expressing as this repulsion?
Well, I can't speak to what Adam's
I flipped
process
the example the
is.
wrong
I
direction,
can't speak to Adam's process because he's looking like, But the way that I operate is like, say I'm the one that doesn't want the anal sex.
Yeah, that's better.
I would be like, first of all, what is it about anal sex that repulses me so much? Like, what is it? What is the feeling? You know, maybe I'd get into the juice or the it's an out hole or, you know, whatever. I would go into like the stupid minute things, but as I go deeper and inquire more and more into it, then maybe there's like, oh, I would feel disgraced as a woman or something, or I would feel like used by a man, or, you know, like I don't want anyone to have that much fucking power over me. So then it starts to feel hot.
Yeah.
Fucking power. Oh, I want fucking power. That's what I want. So then it flips into a desire. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that, all right, spreading my cheeks, here we go, you know. But what it does mean is that there's spaciousness for him to have that desire and not make him wrong. And there's learning on my side to be able to at least articulate a desire, and maybe even get to a place where I can tolerate his desire, but not necessarily have to act on it.
Okay, I love that suddenly there's so I love you flip it into a positive or an affirmative desire. And then that creates spaciousness for him to have his desire, but I don't see how. I see that, but how does that happen, though?
Because I have empathy then. Rather than being repulsed by how could you want this thing, it becomes, I can understand why you want this thing, because I know what it's like to want to have fucking power. But then you get to talk about boundaries and agreements. But for now, you know, I have to set up let's set up a boundary that I choose not to go down this path right now. And then it becomes, then I also trust that he can do his own work. Okay, she has said no. What is it, how can I do the work now to tolerate the pain of not having a desire fulfilled? Because that's how relationships are. There is never no relationship on the planet where every single desire, each person fulfills every single other person's desire all the time. There's always going to be disappointment or drop or whatever. And so it just becomes learning how to learn and grow and tolerate that paradoxical pain and immense bliss that comes from being in relationship.
Okay. And speaking of that, would you be willing to share with me your most recent painful fight/conflict?
Yeah, although I do want to add something to the last topic.
Sure.
Which is, I just have I don't know if it's a different take, but a context around it that I think is important, which is there's a lot of things that like I desire that Candice doesn't, that are not big fights. So, I mean, like one of them is, Candice doesn't like going to movie theaters. I love going to movies with my friends. Actually, we're going to one tonight together, which I don't know how I pulled off, but like that just doesn't become a huge issue. But how I would process it is if I was getting so upset that she wouldn't share this with me.
Yes.
That's when and essentially as soon as that happens, if I'm awake, and hopefully I am most of the time, sometimes I'm not.
You mean emotionally awake?
Yeah, conscious.
Conscious, yeah.
Emotionally, I'm probably pretty awake at that point because I'm upset. But aware of that, and then I can go, well, if I'm this upset, chances are it's not about the movie.
Yeah.
It's not about the anal sex.
Right, totally.
There's something in me that is being nicked by this. There's some way that I don't want to think of myself as a person, or I don't want to think of our marriage, or I don't want to think of my partner as a reflection of me. Like, oh God, I don't want to be this guy with this woman who doesn't want to go to movies. I don't want to be with the boring wife. I don't want to be the loser. I don't want to be the outcast. And then and I've actually had moments where I've looked at Candice and gone, oh my God, I'm afraid that I'm going to go back to elementary school being this like little outcast kid because you're doing these things.
Right.
And then pretty much almost like magic, once we really get to that point, and on the limbic sense it's felt and shared, it just kind of resolves itself.
Yeah.
Anyway, that would be my answer to your question, and now I'm happy to talk about our last fight. I can't remember what it was.
I remember.
Oh, okay.
Valentine's Day.
Oh God, we're gonna go there.
We don't have to go into details.
Oh,
I don't.
God.
I don't.
Oof.
Did it resolve?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is it embarrassing?
Yes.
That's why
me.
you don't want to go there?
For me, it's embarrassing.
For him, it's a little embarrassing, and it can be a little. It can seem from the
it's
outside.
it's one of the best examples of reality actually transforming.
Right.
ugh, okay. Do you want to start or shall I?
You can go.
Okay. So I had so there's a term in certain kind of coaching or conscious communication circles or intimacy circles called withholds. And that's where you're not sharing something that you're experiencing for whatever reason. And that gets in the way of intimacy. Sharing a withhold should be done with the intention of, having greater intimacy.
As opposed to using it as a sword to
As a
attack
weapon.
somebody.
Yeah. And there's also a concept of discernment, which is not everything that you experience should be shared. And this was a moment in our marriage where it was kind of a perfect storm of all of that coming together. And to this day, I have no idea if I made the right choice or the wrong choice or if my discernment was on or off. But we're still going strong, which seems to be good. But I've caught a lot of hell from my friends around this one and questioned myself around it and been questioned around it. But
Are you going to tell us?
yeah.
About it?
So for a while, I was starting to not love the way Candice's body looked all the time. I was just like, oh yeah, I don't like her breasts aren't exactly the way I want them to be, and her legs aren't. I wish her legs were a little longer, and it just was building up in my mind. And it was this thing of like, it's getting so intense. I just can't imagine it's about her actual real life body.
It's definitely not. It's about you.
It's about me.
Without
And for
question.
7 years of my life before I met him, I was anorexic.
Which is why I would never share it.
Right.
So I was holding this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, was it actually Valentine's Day? It was the day before.
It was like the day before.
It was the day before
Valentine's
Valentine's Day. A year ago.
No.
It was this year?
This year.
It was just a couple of months ago.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Let me just note, this is the thing about a powerful withheld statement, is that it generates so much energy around it that when it finally comes out, it almost invariably comes out messily.
Very wonky. And
Hugely
I think that's why he had been holding this thing for so long, because he didn't want to hurt me, because he knew about my past. So when it did, it just hit me.
and it was right after I'd had a date with another woman.
He just had, and at first he was telling me like, oh, my heart feels open. I feel, and like, I'm like, oh, great.
And it did. And
Tell
it
me,
did.
tell me about these awesome things that you're feeling now because you had this date with a woman. But as soon as it flipped into something just like, now I feel great. Now I feel so great. I'm just going to share these 5 things about your body that I don't like because I feel so open and you seem so receptive. And it just immediately hit me. And so for like a day, I was just sobbing. And first of all, I think it opened like a trauma wound around the anorexia.
Of course.
So I was dealing with that, but I was able to step back and say, okay, first of all, there's a huge emotional reaction because I'm dealing with some huge trauma here.
Yeah.
And then when I was able to like kind of process and like, okay, feel my anger and what is my anger saying? Ultimately what it came down to was, I want you to choose to be attracted to me. So I think we always think of love as a choice, but we never think of like attraction or turn on as a choice. And here was an opportunity for both of us really to choose attraction and turn on as a choice.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to that concept of choice. I had a sort of a miraculous discovery maybe a year or two before this happened, where just, a couple, there's sort of an ebb in the emotional charge of a relationship. And I was going through a lot of fear around that. And like, oh my God, I just don't know how strongly I feel for Candice. And then as soon as I just chose to be in the relationship, first of all, I felt kind of the pull away. And then I missed her. And then my heart reopened. And that all happened the instant that I chose to find the love in myself. And a similar thing happened actually just 2 days later. For Valentine's Day, we'd scheduled, we'd signed up for this intimacy workshop. And the woman leading the workshops invited us to touch our partner with like an intense amount of turn on. And it was just like this sort of floodgate of withheld turn on just came pouring through.
That is where the fascinating dialogue around this is for me. And because of the limitations we have on studio time today, we've got to end the show here pretty quickly. So but I just want to bookmark this because I want to either come back to it in another interview or invite you to write an article for the magazine about it. There's something for men, for all of us, but it expresses for men in this specific way around the attraction that we have for our partners, and which always ebbs and flows, and the way in which we allow affection to be expressed or not through this medium of our physical attraction, and it gets really gummed up. That mechanism just gets clogged, and you ungummed it somehow. And I'd really love to know the details of that. I wish we had time today.
Well, I'll just say in a nutshell, it does come into that thing of tolerating discomfort because the resistance comes up, being with the resistance, and then choosing. There is an active choice and making it a practice. And the sexuality changes. You know, the new sex is that instant, easy turn on. And our sex, it takes a little bit of us focusing on creating it. But then when it happens, it's richer and deeper and has more flavors and colors than I've experienced elsewhere. So I'll leave it with that.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
It really is. We'll have to expand that at a future time. I like to end shows with a quick game of this or that. We're going to make this one shorter than usual, so I'm going to cut to the chase. The last 3 questions. Batman or Superman?
Batman.
Batman.
Enlightenment or $1 billion?
Enlightenment.
$1 billion.
Okay, you have to say why.
Because then I can, because they're not mutually exclusive.
Lovely. Okay, and if you had to choose, either live for infinity or die in the next 5 minutes.
Oh, die in the next 5 minutes.
Die in the next 5 minutes.
Solid. Guys, thanks so much for being on the show. It was a real pleasure to talk to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for our interview with Candice and Adam, folks. If you'd like to learn more about Candice, you can find her blog at www.theorgasmiclife.com/blog. Put a link to that in our show notes. You can learn about Adam and his coaching practice at www.adamgordoncoaching.com. And I'll also put that in the show notes, along with a link to the YouTube video that they mentioned, wherein they're giving their wedding vows. If you liked what you heard on our show today, please subscribe to us on iTunes. It makes a big difference when you do that. Please also consider donating to our Patreon campaign. We're on a mission to crush shame, as you may know, and every penny really does help. You can find our campaign at patreon.com/together. That's patreon.com/together. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like to be on the show, reach out via one of our platforms. You can find our website at www.together.guide. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/togethershow. Twitter and Instagram are both @together_show, or you can email me at host@together.guide. Our producer is Charlene Goto. Our web designer is Courtney Munna. Our art director and my one and only is Aubrey Pick. She just cooked chicken. I'm going to go eat it. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.